Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show tonight. Our guest is Paul Cornwell of Atlanta, Georgia, founder of many cannabis events there, including a Black Crows benefit for marijuana legalization in 1992, and purveyor of several venues. So we'll be talking to Paul Cornwell. Stay tuned for that. We have our Hemp News segment coming up, but first we'll bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first story tonight comes from the nation's capital. Vice President Kamala Harris said last week that under Schedule 1 status for cannabis under federal drug laws is absurd and patently unfair, and urged the DEA to reschedule the plant under the Controlled Substances Act. Harris, who started in politics as a prosecutor in California, also said the criminal justice system has failed on its promise of equal justice under the law. Kamala said, quote, "And I say that with full knowledge of how this system has worked, including my experience as a prosecutor," end quote. The Department of Health and Human Services last year recommended that federal government move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, however, has since claimed to have the final say on any scheduling action, and some insiders have reported pushback against the rescheduling plan from the Federal Enforcement Agency. We advocate completely removing or descheduling cannabis, not rescheduling, descheduling cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, since it's non-toxic and it's never led to anyone's death. In the meantime, President Joe Biden has pardoned federal cannabis possession charges, but those are just a drop in the bucket of overall cannabis convictions in the United States. The president did also call on state governors to issue sweeping cannabis pardons. From Canada, researchers from Health Canada and the National Research Council of Canada reported finding metal nanoparticles inside both legally and illegally sourced cannabis vape pen liquids. Cannabis vape pen liquid is both legal and illegal markets, contains nano-sized metals including nickel, chromium, lead, zinc, and copper. According to this study conducted by researchers from Health Canada and the National Research Council of Canada, high levels of nickel and zinc were found in illegal samples, while the legal samples contained the highest levels of copper content. In a statement, Dr. Susanna Gustachova, a scientist involved in the study, said there are potential health risks associated with nanoparticle-sized metals, which can be highly reactive and harmful when inhaled. Our next story tonight is from Baltimore, Maryland. The co-administration of THC in the terpene limonene is associated with reduced feelings of anxiety, according to data published in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Researchers with Johns Hopkins University assessed the influence of limonene on THC's subjective effects. Limonene is a terpene commonly found in many citrus fruits and is among the more abundant terpenes in cannabis. Participants who inhaled limonene concurrently with THC reported significantly reduced feelings of anxiety and paranoia as compared to those who inhaled THC alone. The inhalation of higher quantities of limonene was associated with more pronounced effects. This study, vaporized D-limonene selectively mitigates the acute anxiogenic effects of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol in healthy adults who intermittently use cannabis, appears in this month's edition of Drug and Alcohol Dependence. Our last story tonight. The Oregon legislature has passed a bill to cap the number of cannabis licenses in the state, an attempt to mitigate oversaturation in the cannabis industry. According to the staff member's summary, the bill would cap production and retail licenses at one each per 7,500 residents 21 and older, and 12,500 per resident 21 and older for processors and wholesale licenses. The legislation comes as Oregon's legal cannabis market experienced a decline last year from $955 million in sales. The market had peaked in 2021 with $1.2 billion in sales. Retail cannabis prices in 2023 fell to $4 per gram on average. The measure would also allow interagency cooperation for inspections and enforcement of industrial hemp operations, including allowing for National Guard assistance to support Oregon Department of Agriculture and law enforcement in inspections and enforcement of industrial hemp laws. Additionally, the bill directs the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, in consultation with the Oregon ODA to Department of Agriculture, to create a map of locations of premises licensed to produce cannabis or industrial hemp, and allow law enforcement agencies to accompany the Department of Industrial Hemp operations throughout the state. It also directs the Commission to establish a registration system for industrial hemp products that contain cannabinoids and are intended for human or animal consumption or use, and establishes a civil penalty of up to $10,000 for each registration violation. The bill also directs the OLCC to establish uniform standards for minor decoy operations to investigate the sale of cannabis products to individuals under 21. Most of the measure's provisions take effect January 1st, 2025, while the registration system to industrial hemp would take effect January 1st, 2026. Meanwhile, Oregon State University's Global Hemp Innovation Center received a $10 million USDA grant to collaborate with 13 Native American tribes on hemp economic development, aiming to create sustainable supply chains and enhance the hemp industry's role in tribal and rural American economies. Oregon State University's Global Innovation Center announced on Monday it received this $10 million grant to work with 13 Native American tribes for hemp economic development. The project's funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Institute of Food and Agriculture and seeks to develop supply chains based on the needs identified by an intertribal business consortium. That is the end of our hemp news segment tonight. If you are a loved one or looking for help finding a doctor who can help you get a medical marijuana permit, we have referrals to doctors all across the country. Call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Help us restore hemp. I would like to introduce an activist who's been active even longer than me, Paul Cornwell. Are you in Atlanta, Paul?
I am in Atlanta, Little 5 Points.
Okay, well,
Center.
Paul has been a founder of Camp back in 1978, worked with the Yippies through the 70s and 80s, and to today. So I want to welcome you to Cannabis Common Sense, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Well, I think you said that this shirt you're wearing, it says "Will work for the weed." Okay, so you've been selling that one for a while.
I have. I had a T-shirt factory. I was printing tie-dye for the Grateful Dead, and they wouldn't go up $1 on my prints. I was selling them for they were providing the shirts, and I was tie-dyeing. Anyway, so I had a bunch of shirts left, and I was driving up to this North Avenue to go to the shop, and saw this homeless guy that says this will work for food, and I'm smoking a big fatty, and I said, I bet he'd work for weed, and went bing. So I got the artwork out and printed it. And it was big. It went worldwide, and I had the originals were on tie-dye. So
let's go back as far as we can go with you. Did you become active in the early 70s or the late 60s with the Yippies and political activism?
Well, I guess I first met the Yippies at the White House smoke-in 1974.
Okay.
And in 75, I got to meet Gatewood. I met Dana and Aaron Kay, all of which became good friends. And
I first went to my very first cannabis event was the White House smoke-in in 78. I went to the bust-in day where I got to meet Tom McArea and Dana and Aaron Beal. And then in 82, I believe it was March of 82. I remember now. We went to a Chicago Democratic National Convention thing at the Lincoln Hotel across from Lincoln Park, where the 68 Democratic Convention was a worldwide freak show, pretty much. A police riot is what the media labeled it. They even beat up Dan Rather.
When I saw that in the media on television in 1968, that's what perked my interest on the group Yippies. And I went to the 78 reunion in Chicago and Freedom Park there. So
all right. So
Christy Hefner was there, which is
So you've been organizing things in Atlanta for a long time, and we talked on the phone just the other day for the first time in many years, and you told me you would organize the Black Crowes concert, which at the time I think was the largest pro-marijuana legalization event in the world. The
Right.
Black Crowes being a rock and roll band I've always really liked, and before they did that show with you. But you've done some other benefits too. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. The first the first smoke-in Atlanta was in '78, and that's when we formed Camp. Shay Adams, Dana Beal, Ed Rosenthal, Gatewood Galbraith, Dennis Perone, and it was an idea of a coalition of all the groups because there was so much bickering going on between NORML and the Yippies about decrim versus legalization. Let me just say, I've always been against commercialization of marijuana. I think it should be decrim, and each individual should not be subject to criminal penalties. As for corporations and their massive access to profit, I don't really care. I support growers and hemp growers in particular in Georgia. So anyway, after the smoke-in, we did a bunch of smoke-ins and marches, and Gatewood always came from Kentucky, and Dana when he could. Oh, Steve D'Angelo was in amongst the midst, who I'd met when he was 18 at some NORML conferences in '78. And I did smoke-ins until the Alternative Convention in 1988, which was the Anti-Democratic National Convention. And Dana, of course, spoke, and Tim Leary, Russell Means, Ron Paul, just a bunch of different people, bands and everything. And the city wanted me to change the name from the smoke-ins when we did a Washington Park, had to take them to the federal court. Anyway, they wanted me to change the name, so we came up with the Great Atlanta Pot Festival in '89, which was the year after the 1988 Democratic National Convention. And so we did local groups, 1,000 to 3,000 people for a couple years. And then the Crowes signed their deal in my rock club, the Metroplex in Atlanta. I was running about a 900-seater rock club. And they were Mr. Crow's Garden at the time. And they had full access to play for me a bunch of times, and et cetera. And Rick Rubin signed them in my club, actually, that's where they were practicing for the audition. And we've been playing with the groups, the Grapes. They played a lot of smoke-ins. They were friends with the Black Crowes. I was friends with them as well, but not as close as the Grapes. And so they came, and the Grapes were playing the state capitol for a rally. And two of the Crowes showed up and confirmed they were going to play for us. They were having troubles with Budweiser at the time, with a big local promoter, and they didn't want to sign a deal for Bud. I said, well, just come play for Buds. And they agreed to. And that's what happened. So in '92, they played. I was well hooked in with social media, which wasn't that big at the time, but I was tied in with Steve at High Times. And he promised, that if we did the Black Crowes, he would give them a front cover. And then I was well connected with Bill Tush and WTBS, which turned into CNN. So consequently, it went viral nationwide without much social media to back it up. But it was the first, what we considered a success, was the first national breakthrough to straight media. Because up till that time, we were only getting the Berkeley Barb or Yipster Times or Village Voice. We were really breaking into national media. So the Crowes actually broke the dead logjam on that.
All right. As I recall, you had like 50 or 60,000 people show up for that.
With the Grapes and Black Crowes and some other groups, yeah. And a lot of speakers. Keith came and spoke, and it was a coalition between Georgia NORML and Camp, and it was very successful. The barricades actually came down at one point. They wouldn't let me put up metal barricades. I had wood 4x8 sheets. We were on a flatbed. I had to pull in a trailer behind it for the Crowes to stay in. I hired Red Dog Squad, which was a super elite police group, to do my bound security at the stage, which later the mayor found to be just disruptive.
Oh.
They disbanded the group, the Red Dog Squad. So, but I was happy to have them.
So I know, Georgia currently just has a very limited medical marijuana program, right?
Yes.
What is the strictures of that? It's like you can have low THC cannabis or something. Do you know the rules regarding that?
Sure, yeah. If you have a card that they issue, uh, it grants you immunity for possession up to 20 ounces of low THC oil, up to 5% THC. And but you can't buy it anywhere. Now you can through some. They've just recently passed it, so you can get it at certain distributor pharmacies. No, the Fed stopped most of the pharmacies from selling it, threatening to take their uh, what do you call it, DEA approval for their drug distribution. But yeah, you can't buy it here. You can have up to 20 ounces. We had a reverend through a church because we found an immunity clause in the original documents of Georgia as a colony that churches and could provide medical care and medicine. So I provided low THC oil and stronger for patients in need in Georgia for a long time. Unfortunately, Reverend Greg Davis passed last year, and I didn't continue the program. But so we've been active lobbying. I lobbied state capitol with the first card holder, David Garrison, at the state legislature for years and years, trying to get it statewide decrim, which we still don't have. But we did get the medical marijuana.
So you now have Cannabis Nation. I know you told me the other day that you had trademarked Cannabis Nation, and you've been working with people in various cities. You want to tell us about Cannabis Nation?
Well, I proposed a streaming news network, along the lines of Fox Nation or so many other nations out there now, and went and got the .coms, .nets, .tv, and I'm trying to set up the YouTube streaming television network, whatever thing they have. I'm not a techie, so I'm having a little difficulty. But I do have a lot of people with podcasts and streaming things that are interested in working with me. There's a Weed Nation or something like that, and I have friends in LA and San Francisco, and of course you, and DC. And I work with John Pilka still, seeing him, who did the July 4th White House for years and years. Who used to do posters in my rock club, is where the Crows actually signed to do their album with. Anyway, so that was called the Metroplex, and I did that for 9 years, which was the biggest punk rock club in the South. But it was a multi-use club. A lot of people thought it was punk because I had all the punk rock groups play there, and heavy metal, but it was reggae, soul.
And so Cannabis Nation is a website. What are you doing with it right now?
Cannabis Nation, it's not up and running yet. I'm just trying to get all the parts together and people that want to contribute to the content. And I'm not sure of the business plan on how it will pay for itself other than subscribers right now. And or there's some play it forward, and there's of course crowdfunding. So I'm looking for backing in that sense, because it would take a lot of money, and probably to have a studio where you can do mix and monitor the stream, etc., organize all the podcasts and streaming, and of course secure advertisers, etc. But Cannabis Nation, I thought, was a great name, and the technology is there, which wasn't back in the 90s and the 70s when I started, and so with social media and everything, Cannabis Nation could actually pull. Yours is doing well, right? Obviously you've been doing it a long time, and Basically, I wanted to break it down so I had representation from around the world, but all the states in the United States could have their own streaming and podcasts, et cetera, so we could see what's going on locally and what was happening on their levels, so on the local level. So.
All right. So you're in the process of setting up. If we can help in any way, just let us know. We're producing an hour, between 40 and 50 times a year. So
I have friends in Oregon myself, that, and Jack Harrar, is a good friend of mine. He had a farm up there in Oregon, and they produce a lot of pretty good pot up there, so it's okay.
Yeah, we do, and we have it fairly inexpensively. I knew Jack very well. I met him in '82 at Captain Ed Adair, his partner there, introduced me to him after I'd worked for Tom Hayden for a few months, registering voters for his first successful political run. But I stayed in Captain Ed Adair's head shop on Van Nuys Boulevard, and just as I was about to leave, go back to school at Evergreen State College, Ed said, "You got to meet my partner, Jack." So we both ended up moving here to Oregon. Hey, there it is, the very first edition. That's a valuable thing.
Jack came and spoke with Steve Gaskin and Gateway Galbraith and all at one of the Great Atlanta Pop Festival assemblies when we did the first event ever at Centennial Park after the Olympics.
Well, in '85, we put marijuana legalization on the ballot, and Jack published that very first edition of his book. He printed that newsprint version and gave it away in about 20 different precincts. Statewide, with that legalization initiative in '86, we only got 27% of the vote. But in the precincts that we gave out Jack's newsprint book version, we actually won those precincts. So it made a big difference in terms of the turnout. If only we could have afforded to put it in every house in the state, we might have won marijuana legalization back in '86. That was a pretty radical bill. It said you could grow
the OMI.
Yeah, OMI. It said anybody over 18 could grow their own marijuana. It didn't really set a plant limit or anything. So our opposition said high school kids would be able to grow unlimited amounts of marijuana. But, we went forward then. Jack actually pushed vehemently for the age to be 18. I thought it should be 21, but Jack, as you know, is pretty forceful and bombastic, so he won the day. And we wouldn't have won with the age limit being 21, but maybe we would have got 5% more. It's hard to say. They couldn't have said it would let high school kids grow.
He's a great soul. I was at a party at Oakland and smoking and eating stuff, and I had couch lock sitting next to Jack, and I couldn't get up. Him and his son and I had blasted me out. He could smoke anybody under the table.
Yeah, he wrote that first edition of that book in my house here. He had 3 little kids at the time, and they were like 6, 5, and 3, CC, River, and BJ. And they, at that time, 1985, no one had a computer to do page layout. So everything was cut and paste with scissors and glue. And so the kids were getting in all of his notes and pictures and everything. So we were both growing marijuana to fund the initiative about 3 blocks away from each other. And he asked if he could come over and take over my house, which he did for a couple of months to put together the very first edition of that way back when.
Back then, the movement was really financed by the illicit transport and sale of marijuana. People don't realize that the newcome people to what they call the movement now, which is a corporate rush for profit, which I'm sort of against, but that all the precursor activists that went for movement, the Yippies, Camp, all the other groups, Dennis, Perone, that put down Proposition 215 in San Francisco and California, all financed the movement through illicit sales of cannabis. And some of them paid the price in federal and state prisons. As you know, Jeff got out. So.
I ended up getting busted for growing marijuana there, and it was used against the campaign in 1986, much akin to what happened to Dennis Perone a decade later. But I didn't have anything like his huge pot club. We were growing pot, and I was selling it mostly up in Washington State because I had lived in Washington State before moving to Oregon. And so at that time, the cops came in, and I was only initially given probation. Then I went to school in China for a couple of years and learned about hemp products there, and started importing hemp paper and fabric from China in 1988. But I was on probation, and they violated my probation for traveling without permission. I'd sought permission and got permission from the judge, but the prosecutor never gave me permission. So I ended up.
I got busted in 1970 for conspiracy to possess because I had $5,000 on my boot in South Texas, too near the border. They revoked my probation after I put out international marijuana wholesalers and distributors certificates in '74. Tried to revoke, and in fact, eventually did revoke and extend on the same day in '79. And I ended up doing some federal time and parole.
All right.
You might remember those. I put out in '75.
Yeah, I ended up going through a federal trial, and they offered me a 5-year mandatory minimum. This was in '93 when the trial was. And I didn't take it, so I went to trial and was going to do 10 years. But fortunately, I was acquitted of cultivation. Basically, the prosecutor introduced my library, and there was a chapter in one of the books called Jurors Can Acquit Defendants Even If They Think They're Guilty. And it was all about jury nullification. So when my defense attorney got a chance to cross-examine the cop who introduced that evidence, the prosecutor jumped up. Objection, you can't tell the jury about that. Objection. And the judge says, no, this is your evidence. You introduced this evidence. You can't object to your own evidence. And so that stayed in there. And in the end, I was just convicted of simple possession of marijuana. And I actually got a pardon for that from President Biden last year. I got 2 pardons, one for getting busted in 1989 in the United States Capitol with pot, and the other for that in my home back in the bust was in
just simple possession, though. Mine was conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute. Even though I never saw any pot. And then they came back and revoked it. They'd lost one probation revocation hearing based on my international marijuana company. But then they came back later. I got busted for an ounce of pot in Georgia, and they came and extended my probation and revoked on the same charge. I won. They can't do that to anybody else anymore, but the judge says, well, the judge had the opportunity to do either, so we're going to let the probation revocation stand, and that's why I ended up doing 2-year sentence.
I see. So yeah, so a lot of us had to go through the ringer that way, and like you said, we were funding the movement that way as well. So
the t-shirts then.
Yeah, and Jack's book, that was another thing once it came out.
Yeah.
So
one thing I did want to mention, Ed was another beautiful soul. I mean, Dennis Perone was another beautiful soul who I met in '72. Friends of mine were sending him bales or suitcases full of Colombian from Atlanta.
So I grew up in Dallas, Texas until I was 15. Then my family moved to Asheville, North Carolina. And I lived there on and off. I lived there until '79. And then I came back in '80 and moved out to the Northwest in '81. But so I've also been in the South. What are the current? I remember in '78, the North Carolina legislature debated decriminalizing a quarter pound of marijuana. In the end, they decriminalized 1 ounce, so it was just $100 fine in '78. But there was a string of states, 10 states, that decriminalized down to, an infraction. Oregon was the first, and then California. But
Well,
I think
now some of the local municipalities have a civil citation fine up to an ounce, $100 fine in surrounding area, and the city of Atlanta, and not all the counties in the state, but a lot of them. And we're still pushing for decrim here, but over an ounce is still a felony in Georgia.
I see.
5 pounds to 10 years.
That's a long time. I don't think they give people that long, but you never know. Depends on the judge, I guess.
Oh yeah.
So
considerably less now.
thank goodness for that. So the medical marijuana program in Georgia, though, just allows you to have oil, not flower. Is that correct?
Right. Under 5% THC oil. And you can't legally buy it in the state. Well, now you can in some locations. But when the law was passed, and we lobbied to get the law passed, Senator Peake at Georgia State Legislature sponsored the bill. And Dennis Garrison worked with me at the state legislature lobbying, and he was one of the first card holders. And like I said, we did supply the oil and in greater strengths to the patients in need through the church, Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church. And,
is that in Atlanta?
Well, it was Reverend Greg.
Oh, who just passed away.
It was just a reverend who just passed away, and he was a sole church stand up recognized by the state. So we knew it had provisions to protect it under a decision called Stiller versus Georgia, which allows you to introduce medical evidence for possession, etc.
That's good. So if a patient is growing their own, what sort of crime are they charged with there in Georgia?
They could be grown for cultivation. We think Stiller would allow them to defend themselves under the medical thing. And I'm still lobbying our local marijuana groups to support my efforts to give away seeds that produce a hemp that's less than 5% THC. And if they have a card, I propose that they have the legal right to grow their own medicine, up to 20 ounces. So we'll see. That's still in its process.
I see. So what else is going on there with activism? I know you and I just recently connected because our mutual friend Dana Beal was busted in Idaho. And Dana asked me to contact you to try to get you to donate money to his expenses there and everything.
Well, after the last fiasco in Nebraska, I'm a little dubious in helping him anymore because he doesn't seem to want to learn anything. But we love that.
For court, and they put him in jail.
Yes.
So
he spent a lot of time in Nebraska, which we know saved his life because he had triple bypass surgery, which he would not have been able to afford otherwise.
Yeah.
But we love Dana. I worked with Dana, stayed at number 9 Bleecker many nights because I was in the rock and roll business, and it was right across the way from CBGB. So.
Yeah, right there in Greenwich Village.
Yes, you could look out the door and see if there was a line at CBG.
Well, our friends in Ohio with the Cannabis Museum in Ohio and the activists in Washington, D.C., Don and Adam, they signed up and put themselves on the line with their credit for $250,000 bail.
This is at the museum.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. I've ended up selling a lot of my, I have an antique collection of medical marijuana containers, and the Cannabis Museum has bought most of them over the past few years as I've run into financial difficulties and can't just keep them for my own pleasure. But I'm happy they're in a museum.
Right.
And they've helped me a lot that way.
If you know, at one time, Camp used to have equal full-page ads with normal. Because Tom Prasad was a Yippie, and the Yippies were part of camp. And so we got a full-page ad every time Normal got a full-page ad, and which was quite helpful. But when Tom died, of course, and the High Times was taken over by the corporate elite, that ceased. But Keith and I are still good friends up until this day.
Yeah. It's interesting to see what's gone on with High Times, how their whole corporate situation has imploded. They had been like one of the top brands in the world, but I don't even know if they're publishing
today. And social media, they're of little or no consequence today. And social media has beat them up, that sector pretty hard. Printed publications. And the fold out, which was the brick, the first one, based on the Playboy fold out was worthy, but they lost a lot of writers. I kept up with Steve Bloom for a long time and Steve Hagar over the years, big supporters. Steve Bloom actually helped do the Great Atlanta Pop Festival and helped me get who I needed to do, get signed and everything. And then later on, I produced albums for HR from the Bad Brains, Human Rights, and Who's Got the Herb was put on the compilation with Normal with 311. Who's Got the Herb was by HR, the lead singer of the Bad Brains. All these bands I met through my club in Atlanta. So
you closed your club down though now?
Well, it burned down back in '88. That's a long story too. My girlfriend got missing at sea. I went looking for her. Some homeless broke in, started a fire, it burned down.
Wow. Well, that sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the biggest, most famous punk rock club in the South.
Yeah.
And to keep in touch with CBGB's, Hilly and Seth at 930 Club and all, because we booked a lot of the same bands, and when they were on tour, they went through like that. My first club bands at UK Subs, MDC, DRI. I did the Dead Kennedys at my club. I mean, it was a substantial club.
What are you up to these days?
Well, like I say, I'm working on Cannabis Nation. I'm working with Georgia Cannabis Industry Association, which is one of the girls that worked with the Great Atlanta Pop Festival when we did the Crows, Teresa Baker, and I'm working on a bunch of different things. Let's see, trying to do a digital marketing company where you can post ads worldwide, called AdsCan, CADSCANN, and also I'm working on iBong, which is a bingo game, initially formulated to raise funds for nonprofit groups that were interested in individual cannabis reform. So nonprofit organizations can run bingo, and we built a site where you can subscribe to different organizations and play bingo to fundraise for those groups, plus for fun, or Canadollars, which will be like subscription coupons to trade for products from the various sponsors. Hi, bingo. You'll hear about it.
All right. I'll be looking for it. So,
on presently, and I do housing renovation. I'm working on a place in Carthage, North Carolina, in 1879 Victorian, and I'm still building my house in Negril, Jamaica, and keeping in touch with people in the movement around the country to see how I can help or lobby, and working with the Georgia groups here. Peachtree Normal sort of fizzled out, so GCIA is working. But there's so many commercial groups trying to push their products now, from CBD oil. I opened the first CBD oil retailer in Georgia called the Pot Shop in Atlanta, and I was open for 7 or 8 years. But now there's competition for CBD oil in every gas station and corner brick and mortar. So there's just too much. You can't make a living.
And there's a lot of fakery where people say it's CBD and there isn't enough, or
Right.
You know,
I had to track down and confirm all the products we sold, but I was a little bit different. The pot shop sold hemp clothing and jewelry and books and magazines, Ed's books, Ed Rosenthal, and we had all kinds of novelties and knickknacks and promotional stuff to help push the movement. So it wasn't just a CBD store. We sold a lot of different hemp hats and all just a wide variety of hemp-related, cannabis-related products, and it was the pot shop, and it did well. I let the location, go to another CBD shop that's doing pretty well. They sell lollipops, THC lollipops, low THC. Yeah, I just got disappointed with all this Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10, all this claims to be legal. When you drink a CBD drink, you have couch lock. Those aren't legal, but it's up to debate. But and it's not legal for FDA approval or anything. So I just don't want to get involved in all that. I'm working on my company. I sell cannabis URLs on cannabisco.com. I've got 450 cannabis URLs of various types. If anybody's interested in a cannabis URL, go look at my list at cannabisco.com. That's trademarked as well. So I'm just keeping busy.
well, I often ask people this question. How did you first use cannabis? Where did you first come across it? And tell us about your earliest or earlier experiences.
Well, I was from South Georgia, and after having smoked every plant in my yard, don't smoke the Spanish moss. After having smoked every plant, I couldn't find anything to substitute. I couldn't find any marijuana. So that summer, I was a senior, went up to University of Georgia and looked around and couldn't find any. And so when I got up to the University of Georgia, I was at a concert next to my residential hall where I was staying, and a guy named Weird Harold came walking up to me with a hat and boots, big Bowie knife, and we sat and talked, and he says, "You want to go get stoned?" I said, "I've been waiting all these years for somebody to ask me that." Yes. So we went up to his room, and it took a quarter ounce or so of Michoacan to get stoned. But when I did, and they put the headphones on for Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin, Whole Lot of Love, and Are You Experienced? It was all over. I was totally taken in by the marijuana.
So that must have been like the early 70s if Led Zeppelin and put that song.
1969.
Oh, 69. Okay.
Of course,
So-
then I got into the Doors, and I was already into the Beatles, but I really started getting into what you considered alternative at the time.
Uh-huh. So how did you become an activist?
Well, having got into the marijuana scene, I realized it was a profit in selling it if you could get it from one place and move it to another. So by 1970, I was involved in South Texas. And because, marijuana back then was like 50 a pound to 100 a pound.
I remember that.
And so after a year or so doing that, I got stopped with a bunch of college kids down in Corpus Christi. I had $5,000 in my boot, and they had been trying to obtain 90 pounds of the sweetest looking Michoacan you would ever believe for 65 a pound. And, so I got charged with conspiracy to possess and went through all that rigmarole for 7 to 10 years. But that's when I came up with the idea for the camp and the smoke-ins and joined the Yippies and all that after that. Because I was on bond waiting trial for like 4 years, 5 years. And then I got the Youth Corrections Act, which put me on probation for 4 years. And then they revoked me at the last day of that because I got busted for simple possession in Georgia.
Wow. So they revoked it, and then you
second attempt to revoke me. They tried to revoke me because I put out international marijuana wholesalers and distributors certificates and had a big, huge splash. I mean, that that went nationwide too, long before social media. I was in the Star and all those alternative paper magazines and High Times and We Magazine and Playboy, etc. So International Marijuana, which is still around.com. I'm ready to pop that up. Like again, if I have some investors in crowdfunding and everything, all these ideas I come up with, I'm loaded on ideas and not so great with cash.
I can understand that. We've it's been a long trail here. We were doing real well for a few years with
Stop selling
marijuana patients, but then the big corporations came in and stole it from us with forgeries and lawyers.
These young kids take their parents' money and think they can get rich in the marijuana industry nowadays, you know, and it's iffy to me. I never had rich parents, but
Me either.
I did form some great names and have some great cannabis URLs, and Cannabis is a great name. I just haven't had the funding. I did a hemp line of clothing called Reefer Camo, which you probably remember. We sold a lot of shirts to all over the country, all the way to Seattle and Canada, et cetera, California a lot. And but I ran out of that stock, and it became too cumbersome. I had to import that hemp fabric from China, like you say, and then I had to have it primed and printed in Alabama, and then I had to have it sewn into different products and shirts in South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. So it was a lengthy process. I did a lot of shirts though, and hoodies and stuff. I sold a bunch, and Reefer Camo was good, and it was owned by Cannabisco Incorporated. So I've had it in a bunch of different things: rock and roll, manufacturing, retail. I'm gonna write a book. I've gotten permission from the Yippies to write it. It's called Return This Book.
That's
I'm one of the more conservative Yippies there are. I mean, they know that. But I was good friends with Ben Massell and all the guys, you know. And so I'm going to write. It's going to be my experience, how I got involved, and how I was involved with Yippie, and where the marijuana movement in Georgia and the country went with the Global Cannabis March, a Million Marijuana March that I worked with. And we did millionmarijuanamarch.com and tried to post all the cities and their events, and when the internet came out. So it's just been a long, interesting, colorful life I've had. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, good luck with that book. So do you ever get out here to the West Coast?
Off and on. I go stay with Ed in Oakland, Ed and Jane, and I've been to the Seattle Hemp Fest with Vivian and his wife, and I used to go out west a lot. I'm not real big fan of San Francisco or Oakland anymore, or Portland for that. I'm a Trumper. I'm sorry. I just don't want my country to go down the tubes.
Me either. I don't want it to go down the tubes either. I'm
a Jeffersonian constitutionalist, and so there's just really not too many alternatives for me politically.
Right. Well, the Libertarian Party's out there, but they're marginal at best.
I've supported the Libertarian Party and the Green Party here in Georgia and given them forums to speak and supported their events and everything. I'm pro free speech. I mean, I even let the Youth Communist Brigade speak on my stages. But I see what's going on now, and I saw it 20 years ago in the universities and the education system, because I studied communism and World War II, World War I, et cetera. And I see where we're going, and I'm not happy with it. I was an anti-war protester. That's why I leaned towards the Yippies in the early 70s. But years later, I came to see where Nixon was probably right in trying to open up China because of the end of the Vietnam War. But I've matured in my opinion on politics. And I don't like where the Democratic Party has gone with usurping the social media and using the bureaucrat deep state as a weapon against political enemies. That's really offensive to me. And as a hippie and an activist for liberty and everything, I still maintain those thoughts. Now I'm in direct opposition to some of my left well-meaning friends.
Well, at least, you're talking. There's a lot of them that are just villainized, casting the opposite side as.
I want to get rid of my friends just because I disagree with them on politics.
Good. So, yeah, I know Dana is a hardcore anti-Trumper. So.
Well, he calls me all the time. I'm one of his best sources on what's going on with Trump. And down here in Georgia, I get calls from Dana all the time about what's going on with that case in Georgia, which is going to get dismissed. And he didn't want to hear that, but their prosecutor, and that's taking a whooping, sort of Georgia whooping, out behind the barn kind of whooping. She ain't even met the state legislature yet, but she will shortly. And this case against him in New York, that's ridiculous. It's driving business out in New York, and as the financial center of the world is about to be threatened and at loss because of Letitia James's prosecution of Trump properties. It's totally unconstitutional. There's no merit to it, and unfortunately, the Democratic Party has learned how to wheedle in to control the prosecutors and the judges. And so that's where we are in the state today, because, and all of it has a direct bearing on where we are on individual liberty with regard to cannabis. People don't understand the connection, but I'm sure you do. If we lose the Constitution, which is a precept of freedom of discovery and thinking, which goes along with the First Amendment of speech and religious freedom. If we start losing due process and 14th Amendment, et cetera, marijuana is just going to be a product like alcohol with total government control. People don't realize that legalization of marijuana has led to total government control. Nobody's not getting charged with cannabis crimes. It's just moved to a different level.
Right. Yeah, I was blessed. My company helping medical marijuana patients got up to where we were grossing up to $5 million a year before the whole corporate takeover and IRS attacked us. And so they came in and took that away from us. So now we're struggling. But I used, according to my accountants, $150,000 a year to grow and give away free marijuana. And from 2001 through 2016, I was able to grow and give away over 7,000 pounds of free marijuana. Of course, at the time, it was illegal to sell it. So giving it away was my option, and not many people could afford to do that. So definitely the cops tried to come and set me up and give me cash. And I always say, no, I don't sell it. It's only for patients. And
I'm still a proponent for the right to freely use, not-for-profit transfer, grow your own, and
I just grow my own here, even though cannabis is fairly cheap and expensive.
I don't want to see commercial advertising for marijuana and this myriad of thousands of brands and strains. And although I have URL strains.xxx or and clones.xxx if anybody's interested for marketing. I'm not opposed to supporting the free marketing as a company called Cannabisco, but I personally am still a yippie and want free use, transfer, grow. I'm like Dennis Peron's philosophy pretty much. I supported the medical move, and if we could, and I tried to lobby in Georgia to move in the position where, similar to what Dennis had done with Proposition 215, to support medical marijuana users' access to the medicine. But it's turned, as you say, a big corporate boondoggle for people that think they can get rich quick snake medicine to me.
So in Georgia, what are the odds of anything changing in the near future in terms of cannabis prohibition?
Well, the lobbyists, the big money people like True Leave and everything are trying to buy their way into the state legislature, and our state legislature is not the most pristine, clean organization in the world. They all got their hands out. They all lobbying this and that, wanting this and that, and to make sure that they get paid. And so there's a lot of argument over who's going to get paid, how much they're going to get paid, where they're going to get paid. Right now, the cost for growing and trading in hemp is prohibitive. The fees are way too high. Just hemp is where we have a legal right to grow hemp in Georgia, but it's like $1 million. You got just to start. You can't do it if you've ever been convicted of a crime, drug crime, or a felon, in fact, I think. And there's just nowhere for a small person to get in. They're talking about, DEI type provisions in it, so they allow equity for minorities, et cetera. But if you don't have $1 million, like True Leave just invested millions and millions of dollars to open up 4 pharmacies that sell low THC oil in Georgia, and they're not going to make any money for years and years, but they have the deep capital from taking bilk in their stockholders, of which I was one, to continue until they think they can hold on for legalization.
Well, that's exactly what happened to us in terms of bilking the stockholders, and it's just terrible what's been happening. Well, we're coming down to the end of the show. Is there anything that I've been talking with Paul Cornwell, an Atlanta longtime activist. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Paul?
Support CAMP, Coalition Abolition Marijuana Prohibition, by getting your organization joining us. And if anybody wants any cannabis URLs, cannabisco.com. And look for Cannabis Nation, which will be a live streaming podcast, like your programs will be on there for sure. And I don't think I'm going to do another Great Atlanta Pop Festival unless the situations nowadays with security and insurance costs and production and bans has just made it almost impossible to do the productions. Why I joined the Yippies initially, because they found out I could produce shows, and they signed me up right away in '75.
Right.
So I just generally, I'm sort of semi-retired now. I'm 72 years old, and I like to go to Negril and just chill.
It's a beautiful place. I only went there once back in the mid 80s. But...
Welcome to come stay at my house right by the lighthouse on the West End.
All right. Well, I appreciate that invitation. Got to be able to afford the ticket, but a place to stay is often one of the most important things.
Oh, yes. And I've got some of the best Orange Hill grass available. You can grow up to 5 plants in Jamaica now, and up to 2 ounces on the road. Hold it. So they used to have lines and lines in front of the police station and the courthouse. Uh-oh, there's my call to go.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Cannabis Nation, and look them up. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.